Good day from eBizRadio.com. I'm Nick von Stein. I've got Jayson O'Reilly from Atvance Intellect with me today. How are you?
Hey Nick, I'm very well. How are you keeping?
It's day, 60 of the lockdown, you know?
yeah, 5,000 Zoom calls in, 25 Teams calls.
Yeah,
We're good. We're good.
yeah, that's what it feels like, you know? So many meetings, so many conferences and things like that. Interesting topic we've got today. So essentially, it's been retermed, but it's white hacking. That's what we're really talking about today. It's been retermed as offensive security, and we're going to explain these terms. But let's start over there. What is white hacking, and why has it been rebranded as offensive security?
Nick, I think one of the things that we've seen, and specifically in a lot of organizations, and we need to make sure we put it out there and we make sure it's right. Not everybody can afford to do offensive security. And when I say, and that's just check that the front door is locked and make sure that you can't get to the ground jewels. Not everybody can do it. Most organizations today effectively employ techniques and technology which effectively protect them sufficiently. But when we typically look at the industries that are most targeted, one of the critical facets of that is constantly assessing their environment to ensure that they have a level that ultimately cannot be penetrated. Or if they can be penetrated, let's fix the problem. So, and that's how white hacking came about, right? You know, the best thing to do at the end of the day is employ a black hacker who's now become white hat, because he's realized the dark side isn't good, great anymore.
Dark side of the force, yes.
There we go. Dark side's not great anymore, and goes over to the white side because you can now get a corporate job and it's paying, it's paying sufficiently well and it's regular income, right? But organizations have popped up at the end of the day where you have hacking exposed type cultures, and you have penetration testers, and organizations focus on what they term as this offensive security strategy, right? And the whole concept at the end of the day is ensuring that what you have done is sufficient to make sure that you cannot be compromised. And that's it, right? It's the age-old adage of checking yourself to make sure you're sufficiently covered.
And how does that sufficient coverage come about? Is it just a constant, let's say, you would let me restart that. Let me restart that entire thing. How do they go about testing the network? Do they take like a clone of the entire network and then attack the clone, or is it normally done an actual attack on the network? Because I imagine if you do a real attack on the network, even if it is for defensive purposes and you're testing it, you can cause issues.
Well, absolutely. So there's three specific ways. One is a white box, a gray box, and a black box, right? And it's quite nice. These guys have put them into boxes. White box is very simple. Ultimately, you give me certain access, and based on that access, I can determine where I can go to. I think what is important is most of the time when offensive security is employed by organizations, it's done with the basis of trust in mind. Okay, so these are people that are trusted in the market. These are people that have referenceability and they have credibility. So, that is also a very critical thing to understand, is that not anybody, is employed from an offensive perspective. The gray box, that is where you give me certain access, but you also make it a little bit more difficult for me to get into your environment. And then the black box testing is really, you give me nothing. I come in, I'm going to see if I can get into your environment with the controls, the techniques, the authentication mechanisms that a normal customer would see. Remember this, every organization today in some way, shape or form has a digital footprint. How that digital footprint is used is obviously different, right? Some organizations utilize their digital footprint for their customers to log on and consume their services, and some organizations utilize the digital footprint purely from an informational perspective and an engagement and social media perspective, right? So most organizations have a digital footprint, and when looking at a black box strategy, it's very much about, okay, come in, see what you can do, and here is my web address. And only with my web address do you come in. there is very much a contract that happens between the entity, being the company, and of course the offensive assessment supplier, and that is the trust. The trust at the end of the day is you're going to go to a point where you're not going to break anything. You're going to show me what you can access. You're going to show me what you can exfiltrate. You're going to show me where you can go, and then you're going to provide me with a report. And that's where the challenge comes in. I had somebody that explained it to me the other day quite nicely. Is that we give the power to the offensive provider, and effectively they go and they look at a maze, right? And they go into this maze and they do all kinds of crazy things, and they then develop a report in a photograph in time and tell you how bad things are, and then let you go and work on the report. And that's fine. The problem is many organizations today struggle with things like patching. They struggle with manpower and skills. We've spoken about that in previous. So getting to the problem that has been highlighted is a challenge. So what they do is they categorize their risk levels: high, medium, and low. By the way, high means it's easy to get to the crown jewels. Low means I might never actually go and look at the problem, but I'll figure it out later. And that's typically what the process and the engagement is. Whereas if we look at where people are today in their digital transformation journey and what they are doing, it's always on, right? So with the advent of cloud, with the advent of all these services that are being consumed and that organizations are providing, it's always on. So that means that my development cycle within businesses, so when we're developing apps or we're creating opportunities and we want to engage with our consumers, that is always on. So it's still fine enough to do a photograph in time. The problem is doing a photograph in time means that your assessment strategy happens once a year. So it's almost like a cybersecurity audit or an IT audit. It's the only time of the year that you see your IT professionals running around trying to really fix stuff, right? Is when the IT auditor comes in. And it's the same thing with a penetration test and the likes of what we call a red team or a blue team or a purple team test is, that happens once a year. One of the things at Advance that we're really augmenting and we're trying to help customers change that mindset is what you need to do, and we've been talking about this over our podcasts, is consumer service that gives you the assurance through your time frame that you're constantly going to be assessed. Because unfortunately, when you're always on a 24/7, it means that there's always a window to be compromised. And more importantly is when you get that report, how do you deal with that report? So going with a supplier that can actually help you mitigate or resolve the issue and then come back and test the issue and see whether or not it's resolved is critical. The challenge that most customers have faced in this space is that in order for you to do that, you've got to pay more. In order for you to do this, you've got to pay more. What we at Advance have really focused on, and again, we've highlighted this in a bunch of our podcasts, is you've got to have the capability to consumerize the service. And that's what we've done, right? We've really looked at how do we help customers consume this, but more importantly, do it on a regular basis. At the same time, one of the things that we've briefly mentioned in our conversations are the things like, effective control assessments, where customers have bought these multi-million-dollar technologies and they're putting them into their environments and they're putting them on the endpoints. But no at time do they assess that continuously to determine whether or not the policies that have been set or the technology is being configured correctly. So again, every step of the way, and you can hear it, it's quite a task of making sure that everything is configured correctly, everything is constantly assessed, and ultimately you're actively assessing your environment continuously. It is a headache. I totally agree with anybody.
Just something that's important to bring up here is the fact that the IT security, computer security, data network security landscape, however you want to term it, it's constantly evolving at an incredible rate, more so than people who aren't involved in it understand. In the real physical world, you get some form of physical protection, and it's done for a while. And in a few years, you go and you update your policies. You simply can't do that in an online environment. It's weekly, it's monthly. the threats are always changing. There's always a new offense that needs to be countered by a defense. There's always a new defense that gets countered by an offense. It really is like an evolutionary arms race almost.
It is. And of course, remember, our world has been totally complicated by applications, right? What you used to be able to walk in an organization and they could count on, 3 or 4 sets of hands that they've got 40 applications that they use as a business. The average application, and this is going into an average organization, the average number of applications that are digested and used in an organization are between, I think the count was between 400 and 900 applications. And that's based on a reasonable sized organization. When you get to enterprises, now we start talking between 800 and 1,500 applications that are utilized, right? So you're very correct. The challenge that we have is, and specifically in depending on the size of the organization and the strategy, is this development of always being relevant, because it is important. Organizations need to evolve, and revenue is obtained very differently. But then also it's the vulnerabilities, right? So with each and every step of the complexity, whether it be infrastructure, how they've deployed things, whether in the cloud or on premise, or what applications are being used. I've always maintained, and don't get me wrong, I've gone through an evolution myself. The birth of the threat is when an application is developed, right? I don't care what anybody says, because 90% of the time when applications are developed, they're developed with vulnerabilities in place, right? And remember, the age-old adage of cybersecurity is effectively we've got a methodology. We go and deploy all these pieces of technology as the methodology or the onion layer, but the onion layer effectively can only move as fast as the vendors that are providing, whether it's signatures. Obviously, with the advent of AI, it's helping us a lot in machine learning. But the problem is still, we've got an application that is vulnerable. So, when an organization looks at this, you're right, it's always catch up. So, coming back to the conversation is starting with an offensive mindset allows you to build a security strategy that ultimately builds from the inside out, or what we term as from the source out. So you've always got an idea of what's happening at the source and how you build out. And that's who's got access, how is it used, is it third parties, isn't it third parties, is it internal, is it external? But starting with the offensive mindset and thinking like a hacker or thinking of somebody who's going to manipulate the applications is very, very important.
How do you guys at Atvance Intellect go about assessing each specific organization's risk profile?
Well, absolutely. So the way that we do it is very much based pretty much on the customer's appetite. Every customer has a different level of maturity and a different level of how they consume digital. But in most cases, we go in with a black box. And the black box is really the ability for us to say, we know nothing about you. We only know you've got a website address. And based on the website address, we will come in and do an assessment for you. And that assessment is really based on focusing on, if we were to get into the customer's environment, where could we go and what could we do? One of the critical components of our strategy is visualization, because what happens today in most offensive strategies, I get given this report and it's got some really cool graphs and it's got some nice pictures on it and it's great. The problem is I need to go and read the app. I really need to understand the report. I need to give it to somebody who understands the report, and then we need to focus on specific areas of risk. One of the key things that we really focus on is being able to provide a platform to the client. So where they can effectively see what it is that our offensive white hackers actually did in their environment. More importantly, what are the lines of getting to the crown jewels? What are the few things that I need to do in order to protect my organization and reduce my risk significantly? And then I can get to the other stuff. But every step of the way, I have got a visualization of how it can be exploited. And we do this through an application called Hiver, which is great because not only now does it give the CISO the visual aspect of whether or not things are being checked or not being checked, but more importantly, what is it actually, where can they go? What can they do? What is the IP address? I can delve into the details. And then more importantly, if they want to retest, once they're fixed, all they do is push a button and say retest, and we retest. So we've really looked at how do we automate this journey for clients, how do we visualize it, but also how do they consume it as and when they need. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to charge a customer R1,000,000 just to come and do a test, right? A customer may have a specific application that they've just spun up, and all they want to do is check that specific application. So we have a number of areas of flexibility and agility which ultimately reduce costs based on traditional models, but they're more important to give the customer exactly what they need. And I think that's a very big differentiator, because in this space, people have done, in many others, the same thing they've always done. We give them the flexibility to do it slightly differently.
And how do you engage with third parties? Because a lot of these companies, like you were saying, some things are shunted to other companies.
Yeah, well, in fact, when we say shunted, I mean even embedded, right? So when we're looking at our digital footprint, I don't know if you've seen this, but if I want to go on to, and I won't use a specific customer, but I'll give you an example, is I go on to a retailer's website and I go on I see, they've got a careers portal, and I log into the careers portal, I upload all my information, they want my CV, they want my address, they want my ID number, they want my contact details, and I go and I press send, right? And now I'm applying for a job. What people don't realize is that application is not actually owned by that retailer, right? That application is actually owned by a SAP, a Sage, an employment agency. So they've sort of outsourced the function, which is cool, because they're not an employment agency. They want to find the best resources for them, right? The problem is that alone is your data. That alone could be customer data. A great example is also rewards cards. When you getting a rewards card, very simply is you're logging all your details, you're applying for the rewards card, and you're going to get the rewards now, right? Your customer detail is now in that environment. Many of those rewards are outsourced. So typically what happens in that scenario is the customer who is providing the service will typically send an assessment to this third party, right? And that assessment's got 15 or 20 questions. Do you have a firewall? Do you have an antivirus? Do you practice safe security? What do you think comes back? Well, I want the R500 million contract, right? So yes, we do. We have a firewall, we have an antivirus, and we have this. Well, great, thank you. You're compliant. Well, no. At the end of the day, if you as an organization have an offensive mindset, you've got to take that offensive mindset to your third parties, right? So one of the critical things that we've really looked at is taking that digital footprint of regardless of who you are engaging with as a customer, and we're providing clients with a risk-based view of whether or not that organization is practicing the same digital security as your organization. And if they're not, we're helping them practice the same level of security. Because let's be honest, right? If I'm an HR company or I'm a digital marketing company, I'm not doing the same revenues as a retailer or a banker or whoever the organization is. And I'm never going to spend the same amount of money. But with the right support, with the right engagement, and the right partner, what you can do is you can actually start to give them the right advice. The aim is never to not do business with those third parties, because they've got some really good apps, right? The aim at the end of the day is to provide yourself, with the assurance that they're practicing really good security. Because remember this, if your data gets breached on their website or your data gets breached on their infrastructure, it's not their name that gets flagged. The example we take, and I can mention it because it is in the domain, is the Nedbank example, right? And by the way, Nedbank is not unique at this at all. They did an assessment on the digital provider, and it came back and they were happy with the assessment. Why wouldn't they be? What they didn't realize is the processes that happen inside of that digital marketing agency. So the digital marketing agency then got breached. Don't know how they found that out. That was obviously between themselves and Nedbank. But 1.7 million customer records got exposed. Now the question is who's at fault? Well, it was Nedbank's name that was in lights. Hardly anybody found out who this digital marketing agency was unless you read the first article. You could have seen who it was. Thereafter, they sort of became known. So this is happening time and time again, and I think you and I discussed it. We are seeing between 60 and 70% of all breaches globally happening from a third-party perspective. So I think, again, that's another dimension that organizations are not looking at. And I feel sorry for CISOs because there are so many moving parts. Because remember this, the onboarding process happens at vendor management or at procurement. At that point in time, there also needs to be a proactive mindset versus a defensive mindset. There are a lot of organizations that have some really great applications and some great services. What we enable clients to do, and again, this is through really, really smart artificial intelligence-based strategies as well as offensive strategies, do it cost effectively and also help them scale, to have a look at the people that they're supporting in order to deliver the services to them. And I think that's what we're seeing changing in the environment, that offensive mindset. Who's got access to my data, who's using my data, who's collecting my data, and then ultimately providing that successfully to the business. So now, when we look at it from a risk perspective, I've covered all the avenues into my organization that would affect my digital custodians or my customers.
Lastly, Jayson, just in wrapping up, some contact details for Atvance Intellect.
Yeah, absolutely. We can be contacted very simply through our website, www.advance-intellect.co.za. Alternatively, my direct number, happy to give that out, 0722 815570. And again, we're 24/7. Not to say if you're not a client and consuming our services, you'll get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning. But please feel free to drop us a note. We're happy to help anybody who's struggling out there or needs some assistance. Advice doesn't cost anything. And again, we're here to help and help people defend themselves successfully.
Jayson O'Reilly, thank you so much for your time today.
Nick, and thank you. Thank you to your listeners as well.